Black girls like you, always chasing white men, stealing like it's a habit, and that cold stare, like you knew you'd get caught. That was the public accusation hurled across Crest Hill Airport's security checkpoint. Samantha Johnson, glowing in a bold orange suit, was dragged away like a thief. No evidence, no questions, just judgment. Because in their eyes, a black woman couldn't possibly look that powerful without stealing it. But minutes later, her FBI badge slipped from her jacket. Silence hit like a bomb. From suspect to system shaker, she became the nightmare they never saw coming. What state are you in? Ever seen a drama like this unfold in real life? Early morning at Crest Hill Airport was as chaotic and noisy as every Monday. Crowds of people pushed through layers of security gates, bumping into each other, checking their watches, frustrated, impatient. Suitcase wheels scraped the tiled floor with a dry, grating sound. Under the blinking departure boards in the domestic terminal, Gate 12 was about to close. A black woman emerged from the crowd. She didn't stand out because of her height or voice, but because of the vivid orange blazer that demanded attention. Her face showed no expression, left hand holding her ticket, right hand on her phone. Her steps were slow, steady, but without hesitation. Samantha Johnson. No one here knew that name. No one knew that the woman stepping across the white tiled floor had once been the lead coordinator in a federal domestic terrorism task force. She had directed tactical teams in Atlanta and had appeared in national strategy briefings before the age of 35. But today, she was just a passenger. No briefcase, no badge, no security escort. She held up her passport, a light brown leather cover, slightly worn at the edges. The agent flipped through a few pages, glanced at the screen, and nodded. Samantha walked through the metal detector. Her eyes didn't seem to scan the room, but she was clearly watching everything. Every TSA agent, every unusual glance, every person in the priority lane who didn't look like they belonged there. This mission had no orders, no paperwork, no task code. She had read a report that was deleted from the system just 23 minutes after it appeared. A breakdown of passenger flagging rates by race. Black travelers made up 78% of those pulled from the line, yet represented only 13% of the passenger flow. No clear reason, no incident reports, just a vague checkbox, suspicious behavior. It felt familiar, very familiar. 15 years ago, her mother had been detained at this same airport for the same vague reason. Missed her flight, lost her job, lost her dignity because no one went back to check what had really happened. Samantha had stayed silent too long. Now it was time to stand in line like everyone else, to see how this system really treated someone like her. She carried no weapon, no badge, but the phone in her hand was recording, and her memory couldn't be erased. He stood outside the security area, tall, gray-haired, with a forgettable face, the kind of face that, if described, would be summed up in bland phrases. Average, middle-aged, nothing special. But Samantha had studied that face in photos dozens of times. Every angle, every glance, the creases around his mouth, they weren't stored in memory, but in the instinct of someone trained to track the invisible. The man wore a gray jacket and rolled a small bag by his side. He smiled and shook hands warmly with a female TSA officer, right in the restricted zone. No badge, no security clearance, yet he walked into the private area like it was his office. No alarm sounded. No one asked for ID, not a single suspicious glance. Samantha subtly adjusted the strap of her bag, fingers brushing the edge of her phone. She didn't need video yet. What mattered was tracking movement. In previous cases, he always appeared minutes before a black passenger was pulled from the line. He didn't always intervene, but he was always present. In one grainy clip, he stood in a corner as a 12-year-old black boy was detained for suspicious behavior and cried in the middle of the terminal. Samantha wasn't here to arrest him. There wasn't enough evidence, but enough to know this was the center of a network where racial profiling was no longer personal bias, but a system run on silence and nods. People like him, with no records, no title, moved freely through controlled areas as if invisible. She walked slowly toward the security gate. No rush, move too fast, and you draw attention. Pause, and you get noticed. Her gaze stayed on the flight information board, but the corner of her eye remained fixed on him. In a brief moment, Samita caught something off. The TSA woman smiled at him, then glanced her way, slightly, briefly, but enough to say they knew she was watching. Her heartbeat slowed, not from fear but because she understood. The game had begun. If there was one wrong move, they would turn her from an observer into a suspect. No weapon needed, no justification, just one casual statement. This passenger is being uncooperative. And every piece of power she held, her FBI credentials, her clean record, her rank, would be crushed by a wrist lock and an internal report the public would never see. And that's what they wanted. Not the truth, the reaction. Samita had just pulled her bag off the security conveyor belt when a scream tore through the airport terminal. "There! That's her! That bag is mine! Don't let her leave!" A white woman, about 35, with bright red lipstick, curled blonde hair, a silk dress, and designer sunglasses, charged toward Samita. She pointed directly, like someone identifying an armed thief. The stream of people exiting the checkpoint came to a halt. Some turned to look. Others had already pulled out their phones, recording without knowing what was happening. "He took my bag by mistake. No, actually, I'm not sure it was a mistake. Black people always know how to play innocent. This is just too much." Samantha didn't move. She didn't blink. Her hand gripped the bag strap tighter. A reflex. The dark brown bag with cowhide trim and a small triangular keychain was hers. Inside were her boarding pass, a carefully hidden internal ID, and a set of personal documents. "I didn't take anything from anyone," Samita said calmly. "This bag is mine, and I can—" "She's lying. Black people can't afford designer bags," the white woman shouted, cutting her off. "I left my bag at the scanner, and when I came back, she was holding it. She hasn't even looked at me once this whole time." The woman's voice grew louder, fake tears streaming, her face flushed with outrage as if her dignity had been stolen instead of a bag. Samantha didn't respond. She knew this scenario, had read hundreds of reports just like it, but now she was the one in the middle, not the investigator, not the observer, the one being accused. A TSA agent arrived, then a second. Neither looked at Samantha nor asked the woman for ID. They looked only at skin color and at the commotion. "Ma'am, we need to check your bag." No explanation, no camera check, no question about witnesses, no offer to mediate, just a short, emotionless command, as if they had handled 1,000 cases just like this and knew exactly who was expected to stay quiet. Samantha tightened her grip on the strap and raised her head. She didn't protest, but behind her dark sunglasses, her eyes were recording every face, every glance, every attitude, like lines of code to be processed later, precisely and coldly. She knew the game well. It wasn't new. The only difference this time was the role, and it was hers. Samantha was escorted away by 2 security officers. No handcuffs, but the half-step of distance between them was enough to signal that she wasn't free. A kind of unofficial detainment, subtle and legal. They didn't have to tie you up to make you feel like a criminal. Just the way they stood near you, like they were standing next to a threat. She walked through the waiting area, fluorescent lights glaring off the polished vinyl floor. Every step she took left an invisible sentence etched behind. The sounds around her overlapped. Suitcase wheels, intercom announcements, crying children, and whispers sharp enough to pierce. Again, these people, always making a scene. Not office material, that's for sure. Samantha didn't look back. She had heard things like that 100 times. But today, as the direct target, the suffocation hit differently. The words weren't even insults exactly. They were confirmation. She was being cast in a role, and the audience already knew the script. A phone was pointed directly at her. She looked into the lens. She didn't flinch, didn't lower her head. Her face reflected clearly on the screen, every strand of hair in focus. Not angry, not panicked, just deeply tired, as if she were acting out a worn-out play whose director had long since died, but the crowd still demanded encore. At the far end of the terminal, the white woman clutched her own bag, just been returned by staff without any verification. She smirked. No need to speak loudly, but those nearby could hear. "I told you, if I hadn't said anything, People like her would walk out with the whole store. Samantha paused for a second. She tilted her head and turned to the security guard beside her, the one about to open the door to the private screening area. "Do you have hallway cameras?" No one answered. No nod, no shake of the head, just silence, as if the question didn't exist, as if truth had never been the goal in this place. The door opened. Samantha stepped inside. A narrow corridor led to an enclosed room. Before the door closed behind her, she turned for one last look, not to find anyone, but as if leaving a message to those still filming, still whispering. That look didn't ask for mercy, didn't beg to be understood, but it made sure she would not be forgotten. The door closed behind Samantha without the sound of a lock, yet the soft click was enough to make the air in the room still, as if freedom had just slipped out through a cold draft. The isolation room at Crest Hill Airport was nothing remarkable, if not downright lifeless. A sealed square block, walls painted in dull beige, no windows, no surveillance equipment, no signage, no clock. Every trace of time had been erased, as if this were a place where people were put on hold from society. At the center stood a stainless steel table, polished to the point that it reflected her face, 2 gray plastic chairs, a lone filing cabinet with an unlabeled dangling lock. Samantha stood in the middle of the room. No handcuffs, no physical restraint, but no one could mistake her for a free woman. 2 airport police officers stood at the door. The first, white, tall, with a wing tattoo on his wrist, had eyes cold as a windshield. The other Latino had narrow eyes and long fingers tugging at a pair of gray rubber gloves. They didn't exchange glances, didn't need to. Their movements were synchronized, like they'd done this 100 times with 100 others like her. "You need to take off your coat and place your bag on the table," the voice came from the white officer. Not loud, not tense, not angry, but left no room for any option but compliance. Samantha held his gaze for a second, then calmly removed her coat, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. Then the handbag. Her hands didn't shake, but her breathing had slowed. Saying nothing was the only way to survive in a room without evidence. Here, truth wasn't something to be discovered, it was something constructed after she left. The Latino officer, now gloved, began opening her bag. No permission asked, no name given, no rights read, no form filled. He pulled out each item: wallet, passport, makeup, phone charger, arranging them like he was inspecting the luggage of a border crosser. Samantha said nothing. She stood upright, arms at her sides, eyes locked on his hands, not out of fear of losing anything, but because every report afterward would be their words. Her job was to give them no extra excuse to twist the story. The other officer didn't take his eyes off her. His hand rested on his belt, right over the baton holster. He didn't move, but just standing there was enough to make an innocent person feel accused. "Where did you come from? Where are you flying to? What's your connection to the woman who reported you?" 3 questions were thrown like rocks across the steel table, out of order, without waiting for answers. Less like an interrogation, more like a psychological test. Each question overlapped the last, not to understand, but to confuse. Samantha answered slowly, "I don't know her. I'm flying for work. This is my bag." No explanation. No defense. Each word lay like a stone, cold, solid, non-reactive. She knew. The more she said, the more likely she'd get tangled in their wording. Here, language wasn't used to communicate, it was used to trap. The Latina officer pulled out her wallet, opened every compartment. Bank cards, hotel card, boarding pass. Everything matched. They said nothing and showed no sign of stopping. The other officer kept going through her personal items. Tissues, a notebook, even her lipstick. He opened the cap and sniffed. "This one smells nice. Gift from a boyfriend." A half-joke, half-slays remark. Samantha didn't respond. He smirked, flipping through a health certificate. Glanced, but didn't read, yet kept it. "You seem a little too put together for someone just flying for work. Looks more like someone seeking funding or attending some advocacy event." The black women I've checked before, they all had that same look. Coming to find an American boyfriend and steal. Way too calm. like they already knew this was going to happen. Samatha inhaled. No sigh, no rebuttal. She stared at his hands, the rubber gloves still sliding through fabric layers, as if searching for something more secret than what she'd packed. But she knew what they were really looking for wasn't in the bag. It was in how she'd lose control. A minute passed in silence. No one spoke. The white officer bent low, reaching into the lining of her coat. A small object dropped. Light hit the floor with a faint clink of metal, cold, echoing. Both men froze. The Latino officer crouched and picked it up. His gloved hand brushed against a matchbox-sized metallic card, silver matte, engraved with simple, unadorned lettering. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Supervisory Special Agent, Samatha Johnson. What do you think happens next? The badge lay on the white-tiled floor, gleaming under the fluorescent light like an alien object dropped between two battle lines. It wasn't large. It wasn't loud, but the silence that followed its fall made the air feel thick. That dim metallic glow didn't resemble anything they'd ever found in a search. Not a lighter, not a mirror, not a weapon. Yet it made both men freeze, as if they had just witnessed the boundary between the one who asks questions and the one who answers being reversed in an instant. The white officer bent down first, not hastily, not shaking, but there was something fundamentally different in the way he moved, as if he was stepping over a legal boundary he hadn't realized existed. His hand reached out, then stopped, when he read the words, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Supervisory Special Agent, Samatha Johnson. The engraving was subtle, sharp, cold, but not flashy, an identity marked by federal authority, and now, no one in the room could pretend they didn't know who she was. The air condensed. It was so still that the sound of latex gloves creaking was audible as the Latino officer took half a step back. His face no longer showed the eagerness or disdain he had while rummaging through her bag. Instead, something flickered between fear and regret. Samatha bent down to pick up the badge, not hurried, not performative. Her movement wasn't about reclaiming power, but affirming she had never lost it. She lifted the badge between two fingers and lightly brushed off a speck of non-existent dust. Just a small gesture, but in that moment, it was like a gentle slap in the face to the two men who had just rifled through a federal agent's belongings without reading her rights, without a warrant, without cause. She slipped the badge into the inner pocket of her coat, then looked up. Her eyes met theirs. Not searching for answers, not claiming victory, not condemning, but cold, deep, and clear enough to silence both men. "Do you want to continue?" Her voice was soft as a breeze, but no one in the room heard it as softly. It struck the walls, the ears, the skin, like an indictment not yet put into words. No one answered. There were no more questions, no more authority, no justification left. No words could redeem what they had just done. The two men, officers once symbolizing order, now looked like they'd just been fired on the spot. Not by memo, but by the existence of the woman they thought it was easy to intimidate. Samatha stepped back, adjusting the coat flapping from one side. She didn't ask further. She didn't need to prove anything. Her badge had already spoken, and in that cameraless room every excuse they had prepared now became evidence against them, because the one writing the report was no longer with them. It was her. The white officer opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words jammed in his throat. He was stuck at a crossroads. Apologize? Too late. Apologies mean little after the violation. Deny? Pointless. The badge said otherwise. Pretend nothing happened? Too risky. The woman before them was no longer a suspect. She was someone who could cost them their jobs, even their freedom. The temperature in the room shifted. No longer the coldness of steel and concrete walls, but the chill of realization. They had made a grave mistake, and the person they wronged had every right to see it through. Samatha walked to the table, placed her hand on her coat, not rushed, not flustered, just a small act, pulling something that was hers back toward her, but it struck a survival instinct in both men. She didn't need to yell, didn't need to threaten. Her calm was what terrified them. The Latino officer broke the silence first. "We didn't know you were a federal agent. No one told us. The system didn't flag." Samatha cut him off. Her voice wasn't sharp, not cold, but soft. Soft in a way that no one dared to interrupt again. "I don't need to be flagged. I need to be treated like a human being before I'm forced to say who I am." No one said anything more. She put on her coat. The motion was neat. Her eyes didn't glance down, no fumbling. Her hair remained composed. Her wrist was steady, but something had shifted. Something unnamed. The room had just witnessed a transfer of power, not by gun, not by rank, but by the way a woman reclaimed her wholeness through perfectly timed silence. The two men stood still, no longer the ones in control. They were the ones being seen. And Samatha, the woman they once suspected of theft, once treated as beneath them, was now the one marking every detail for a report they couldn't alter. She walked to the door. No one dared stop her. No one had the right to see her out. But before she left that room, she turned, stared directly, and spoke slowly. "This room has no camera, but I have memory and authority." Then she turned away. The door didn't slam shut, but the soft creak of its hinges echoed in the air, like the final sound of a trial with no lawyers, no judge, only two men who had just convicted themselves by forgetting. Not everyone who stays silent is powerless. No one followed Samatha as she left the isolation room. The hallway was long, white, cold, and suspiciously quiet, as if this weren't part of an airport but a hidden wing of a malfunctioning machine. Her footsteps echoed evenly, each one like a second hand ticking on a clock that had been thrown off track. She didn't look back. No warning needed. No one dared to stop her. And they knew that holding her even 1 minute longer meant holding back a legal reckoning. She had gone deep enough that threats were no longer necessary. In her hand was her phone, still on silent mode. No video, no recording. Samatha didn't need more data. She had enough, stored in her memory, in her instincts, and in the purposeful silence that had filled the room. She pulled out a small folded piece of paper, the kind of everyday note people forget in their bags, but to her, it was the first report, the first page of a file that would document today's chain of misconduct. She took out a pen, stepping into a corner near the emergency exit map. No one asked, no one noticed, but she didn't write in haste. Every stroke of ink was deliberate. Carl J. Brenner, white, airport security officer around 45. From the moment he looked at her, it was clear he didn't need evidence, just an excuse to be dismissive. Luis M. Ortega, Latino officer, slicked back hair, quick eyes that never made direct contact. The habit of sniffing objects hinted at a man who had done wrong so often that his reflexes had become instinct. Monica H. Phelps, TSA agent, never asked for ID, never verified the accusation, reacted instantly to a white woman's scream. Julia R. Davis, white passenger, filmed the whole thing while standing nearby, but never intervened. Her silence was as much a testimony as her camera. Samatha stopped writing. No need to review. She remembered every detail, the stairs, the distance, the tone of voice, the sweat, the way Ortega's hand gripped her shoulder without asking. All of it was evidence. They thought her silence meant fear, that she had nothing to say, but they were wrong. She was silent to count, to measure how far a system could fall in just 17 minutes when no one questioned it. Now, she had her first answer, on a small piece of paper, written by hand, from memory, and from the chill of someone who had never forgotten who she was, even when treated like she was nothing. As Samatha passed the rows of chairs near the boarding gate, she saw exactly what she expected. The white woman from earlier, the one who had publicly accused her without proof, without hesitation, was sitting with two TSA agents, holding a to-go coffee cup, grinning so wide she nearly showed all her teeth. They were talking. It seemed like a funny story. One patted her on the back, the other laughed so hard they leaned forward. No one questioned them. No one held them back from investigating a false claim. No report was filed. No reminder that Samatha's bag hadn't been fully inspected. Samantha stopped, not from surprise, but to find the exact moment for confrontation. She stood tall, directly in the aisle, not far from them. No one noticed her at first, then one of them did, their eyes meeting hers like hitting cold glass. A smile froze midway. Another pretended to look down at their phone. The white woman raised her head, recognized Samantha, and tightened her grip on her purse. She didn't get up, but her whole body visibly tensed. Samantha didn't speak right away. She just stood there, scanning each face, slowly, calmly, without malice, but without retreat. Sometimes silence is louder than a shout, especially when those being looked at are trying to prove there's nothing to fear. Then she spoke. Just one sentence, but delivered with total control of pace, of volume, of timing. I stayed silent for 17 minutes to see how many laws you'd break. The words weren't loud, but they rang. Not angry, but cleared down to every syllable. No explanation needed because the people hearing it knew exactly who it was meant for. The white woman dropped her eyes, lips pressed tight. Monica Phelps, the TSA agent, turned her face away as if someone had called her. Another officer quietly walked toward the screen, pretending to check departure times. No one answered. No one apologized. No one denied it. No one dared to mention what had happened. Samantha said nothing more. She turned and walked away. Her stride was slow, but certain. No one called after her. No one dared stop her. Not a single sorry, not one regretful glance was spoken aloud, but everything was recorded, not on paper, but in the awkward, hollow silence they left behind, because some verdicts don't need lawyers, don't need courts, don't need to be read out loud. They just need the guilty to have nothing left to say. No one knew exactly who uploaded the video first. The original account went private within minutes, but it didn't matter. Online, 10 seconds is all it takes for something to become irreversible. The video was under 40 seconds long, blurry and shaky like it had been recorded in a rush, but anyone watching understood immediately. A black woman being escorted away from the baggage screening area by 2 security officers. She didn't resist, she didn't speak, but her cold, direct gaze made viewers either uncomfortable or quietly admire her. The caption that came with it was simple. Toxic. Another one? Black woman caught stealing at Crest Hill Airport. That phrase, another one, was the spark. It didn't need proof, just insinuation. Some people hit like, assuming she really stole something. Others commented, again, did they get the right person? She looks familiar. But within 10 minutes, the tide turned. Another unverified account posted a reverse-cut clip. A dim shot of Samantha inside an interrogation room. No clear visuals, but her voice rang out clearly. You want to keep going with this? No identifiable background, but a flash of a metal badge in her hand and a man's voice muttering, "God damn it," was enough to ignite the internet. Less than 30 minutes later, the hashtag #BlackFBI appeared for the first time under a pinned comment. If she weren't FBI, would anyone have believed her? How many black people have been treated the same? Only difference being they didn't have a badge to save them. From that moment, social media went up in flames. Supporters of Samantha began sharing their own stories, being detained at airports without clear cause, having luggage searched for looking suspicious, being asked if they actually bought their ticket while standing in line with dozens of white passengers. A wave of personal testimony took over the threads, tagged as "Flying While Black." The opposition didn't vanish either. They questioned the footage. Why wasn't the beginning shown? Why only the badge moment? Why such a poor angle? Was it staged? Then the questions began to shift. Where's the airport security footage? Why hasn't the airport released the full timeline? What about the recordings from the isolation room? Some observant viewers noted that in the original clip, no one asked Samantha for ID. No one checked her boarding pass. No one read her Miranda rights. Within 2 hours, a flood of content surged across Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, and YouTube, with captions hitting like hammers. FBI humiliated in public. She stayed silent because she was on a mission. Discrimination ends when they realize she has more power than them. But what truly rattled the airport wasn't the clip itself. It was the first question that began to spread like wildfire. Where is the security footage? Less than 24 hours after Black FBI took off, the Crest Hill Airport Executive Board held an emergency after-house meeting. No official minutes, no press, no media reps. Only those with the authority to make decisions, and the fear to keep the truth buried. The first order issued: lock all access to internal camera footage for 48 hours. The public reason: to ensure security during the investigation. The real reason: to prevent anyone outside the system from seeing what actually happened in the isolation room. Meanwhile, the airport's social media pages disabled comment sections en masse. Previous posts were switched to friends-only mode. A vague statement was released: "We are cooperating with investigative authorities and will share updates when appropriate." Online, "when appropriate" was translated as "when no one's looking anymore." But the outrage didn't fade. It evolved. The public was no longer debating whether Samata was right or wrong. The focus shifted to the system, the process, the question of why only passengers' phone clips existed while official footage was mysteriously absent. An anonymous Reddit account, claiming to be a former IT technician at Crest Hill Airport, posted a detailed breakdown of the surveillance system. All areas are under 24/7 camera recording. Data is stored on internal servers with regular backups. It can't just temporarily go missing unless someone manually deletes it or revokes access. That post gained over 80,000 upvotes overnight, and with it came a new wave of hashtags. Where is the footage? Crest Hill cover-up. Delete to protect. Who? On X, formerly Twitter, an independent journalist published satellite images and architectural blueprints of the airport, cross-referencing the clip's location with federally mandated camera points. The conclusion: at least 4 angles should have captured the incident, unless there was deliberate interference. Inside Crest Hill, a chain reaction began. A technical staffer was temporarily suspended for leaking system schematics. The airport's legal team issued memos to all staff: do not comment, even in private chat groups. 3 shift managers from that day suddenly took leave due to media pressure. Samata said nothing. She didn't have to. Because when the people in power start yanking out their own cables, the truth doesn't have to shout. It only has to stand still and watch them scramble. The apartment was dark, lit only by a desk lamp casting its light over a table strewn with handwritten notes, names, times, behaviors, actions, and dialogue. Everything was written in firm, deliberate strokes. But Samata was no longer reading the words. Her eyes were still, gaze drifting into the void, where an old memory quietly surfaced, like an oil slick spreading across still water. She was 12 that year. Her mother, Evelyn Johnson, was a strong woman, working from early morning to late at night. No degree, no benefits, but with a pride that Samantha had never seen in anyone else. They lived in a working-class neighborhood crowded with immigrants, where everyone learned to stay silent to stay safe. That day there was a light rain. Samantha was waiting for her mother at the entrance of a supermarket, a budget chain store where her mom worked the evening shift. Her mother finished work, still in uniform, and walked over to the bakery section to grab 2 fresh baguettes. Her eyes were tired. Her steps rushed. She carried no shopping basket, didn't stop at the checkout, because, as usual, employees are paid quickly at the back counter, but she didn't make it that far. A young manager, white, blonde, neatly dressed, approached with the wary look of someone spotting a suspicious stranger. No questions, no clarification. He simply motioned to security. A large white man stepped from the doorway and yanked the bag of bread out of her mother's hands. Working here doesn't mean you get to steal. People like you need to learn their limits. The words landed like a dull blade. Didn't break skin, but slashed her dignity. Her mother stood still. No defense. No tears. She simply reached out to retrieve her wallet and walked away, eyes lowered as if she were the one at fault. No one followed. No one apologized. No one considered it might have been a mistake. That night they ate instant noodles. From the next day on, She never returned to that supermarket. She lost her job, lost her income, and lost the ability to look people in the eye when entering public spaces. Samata didn't understand why her mother didn't fight back, but she could feel the hollow space left behind, how silence had broken even the strongest woman she knew. Samata wasn't old enough to intervene, but she was old enough to remember, and from that day forward she made herself a promise. If one day she had power, she would not stay silent in place of those who'd been forced to. When Samata joined the FBI, her family believed it was because she was gifted, because she loved the law, because she believed in justice. They were proud. Friends admired her. Her mother, though no longer working, kept a photo of Samata in her federal suit, tucked in her wallet like a charm. No one knew Samata didn't choose the job to protect the system. She chose it to learn how it worked and how it was used to crush people who didn't have a voice. She didn't want to catch criminals, like people always said. She wanted to understand how those in power could push an innocent person into the shadows without ever laying a hand on them. Back then, her mother wasn't beaten, wasn't tied up, wasn't sentenced, but the entire neighborhood knew she was accused of stealing, and that alone was enough. Honor doesn't need a courtroom to be destroyed. All it takes is an accusation, a look, and a crowd that stays silent. Samantha carried that memory through every step of training. During lectures on law, situational response, and professional ethics, she quietly asked herself, who were these procedures built to protect, and who falls outside their reach? When she chose to specialize in internal investigations, a path few young agents dared to take, no one knew that every case she took on was her attempt to answer a question no one wanted to ask. How many ways can the system legitimize injustice? And then, that day at the airport, when the white woman pointed at her, when two TSA officers approached without question, when every glance treated her as if a verdict had already been passed, Samantha wasn't surprised. She simply realized the same story was repeating itself with a new cast in a modern setting, but still the same old script. The accusation comes first, the evidence comes later, and the truth often never arrives. But this time, the one difference was she had power, and she wasn't going to waste it defending herself. She would use it to reclaim a voice for those, like her mother, who had been robbed of the right to explain. Not with tears, not with rage, but through record-keeping, exposure, and forcing the system to look at itself and not look away. 2 days after the video had gone viral across social media platforms, Samantha received an urgent summons, not from Operations or Internal Affairs Disciplinary Division, but from the Eastern Regional Office of Executive Oversight. The subject line of the email was brief and cold, like a technical report. In-person meeting with Director of Internal Oversight. Topic: Media. The meeting took place on the 15th floor, a place Samantha had entered many times as an investigator. But today, for the first time, she was the one being called to the table, not to collect evidence, but to become part of the story. The conference room was closed, softly lit and fully soundproofed. On the table sat only 2 bottles of water, 2 blank notebooks, and a pair of eyes already watching her from the head of the table, Edward Huxley, Deputy Director of Internal Oversight. A silver-haired man, sharp, polished, and Washington to the core, known for his skill in quieting scandals without leaving the smell of gunpowder. He didn't shake hands, didn't ask, "How are you?" He simply began with a vague statement. "We've been following the developments in your case, and we understand why you felt the need to defend your dignity." Samantha didn't respond. She placed a file on the table and quietly uncapped her pen, not to write, but to signal that she didn't come empty-handed and she wasn't there to be soothed. Huxley leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice as if to close the distance. "But you know, the organization is a large entity. It doesn't exist to resolve individual cases. It exists to maintain long-term stability. Situations like this are always more effectively handled internally. Media coverage helps no one." He paused, then continued, slowly, evenly. as though reciting from a crisis management handbook. "We want you to reconsider. Don't let this incident escalate. If you remain silent, the organization will handle it. You keep your position. Your reputation remains intact. Everyone saves face." Every word was carefully chosen. Nothing illegal, no direct threats. But the implication was clear. The institution's image outweighed individual feelings. And silence was not a choice, it was a duty. Samatov didn't nod, nor did she decline. She simply looked straight at him, her gaze unguarded but unyielding. She understood. This meeting wasn't to seek her opinion, it was to pave the way for her quiet retreat. The decision to step back or move forward would be hers. She sat in silence for a moment after Huxley's suggestion, not rushing to respond. She looked down at the notebook in front of her, not to take notes, but to regulate her breathing. She knew full well conversations like this had no recording, no witnesses, and no advocates. If she wasn't careful, every word she said could be twisted into personal emotion, causing internal disruption. She lifted her head, her eyes locked onto his. No evasion, no defense. Just the clarity of someone who had heard enough and would not let this slide. "I understand why you called me in," she began, her tones so calm it forced caution. "And I understand why you don't want this to go further. But let me ask again, just so we're clear, whose face are we trying to save?" The room went still. She continued, steady and slow. "If that face is mine, it was already stained the moment I was dragged through an airport over a baseless accusation. If it's the organization's, it cracked the moment 2 federal security officers searched a passport-holding citizen without reading her rights, filing a report, or verifying her identity. She opened her file, pulled out the top sheet, a witness statement from a passenger who stood 3 meters away that day, and slid it toward him, but not all the way, as if to say, "I have it, but I don't need you to read it unless you want to. A reputation built on someone else's humiliation, I have no duty to protect it. Silence is not a responsibility. Silence is the price the powerless are forced to pay when there's no FBI badge in their coat pocket." She paused, then spoke even more slowly. "I wasn't hurt because I was searched. I was hurt because everyone around me chose to look away as if that was normal." Huxley pressed his lips together. No note-taking. No immediate reply. Samatha closed the file. She didn't stand, didn't retreat. She only added one final sentence, like a needle piercing the silk-covered fabric of reputation. "If this organization needs my silence to preserve its image, then maybe the thing that needs fixing isn't my speech. It's the way you all confront the truth." And this time she ended the meeting herself, not with permission, but with a look. The morning after her confrontation with Deputy Director Edward Huxley, Samity submitted a request for administrative unpaid leave. No rambling, no explanations, just a single line, temporarily suspending federal duties for personal health and psychological recovery. She didn't need to lie. She just had to phrase it in a way that made them not want to ask questions. The request was approved within 6 hours. No inquiries from her superiors, no reply email from HR. She knew that silence was the answer. They wanted her to disappear for now. The less disruption, the better. No suspension, no disciplinary hearing, no press noise. A health noise would calm the media and give the appearance of control. But for Samatha, this was the start of the opposite, an investigation operating outside the FBI's reach. She didn't go back to her home. Instead, she moved into a small apartment in the Brookland area of Washington, D.C., rented under the name of an old college friend, a teacher currently living in California. The apartment had only a desk, a sofa, a single bed, and 2 new locks changed during the night. Samatha used a secondary phone number, a prepaid SIM registered to no identity. Her laptop was disconnected from the agency's VPN. Emails were protected with dual encryption, and she communicated mostly through anonymous accounts. No agency-issued watch, no fast access codes to federal databases, and because of that, she was freer than she had ever been. On the evening of the 4th day, while reviewing commercial flight data patterns through an open-source platform, She received a strange email. No subject. Sender's address masked. The body contained just one line. I used to work at TSA. I have what you need, but I will only send it once. Attached was a compressed file, 27 MB, with a lightly encrypted extension. No viruses, no traceable metadata. Just a single text file with an internal access code. The note beneath it froze her in place. List of misflagged passengers from the past 18 months. It's all in the system, but no one has dared pull it out. She stared at the screen. What she felt wasn't anticipation, but a strange calm, the kind you feel when you know there's no turning back from here. She launched the decryption software, entered the key as instructed. Lines of names began to appear, data entries unfolding one by one like fragments of evidence waiting to be assembled. A break long enough to shift the investigation from the comfort of a government desk into the raw truth her organization had no interest in confronting. It took nearly 4 hours for Samata to fully decode the file, not because the encryption was complex, but because every step revealed another layer of information, and each line of data pulled her deeper into a truth she had suspected but never imagined could be this brutal. The file began with a summary table. 1,972 passengers flagged as risk profiles over the last 18 months. Clearly stated, no criminal records, no prior security violations, not listed on any federal intelligence blacklist. Yet, they had been pulled aside, interrogated, had their belongings searched, forbidden from carrying personal devices, or detained for unexplained baggage checks. She scrolled to the next page. The passenger list read like a silent indictment. Name, gender, nationality, declared ethnicity, internal notes, action taken. In the notes column next to most names, the remarks were short, vague, and deeply subjective. Didn't make direct eye contact with staff. Smiled when name was called. Carried unusually light luggage. Booked ticket last minute. Clothing didn't match seat class. None of the notes indicated any connection to crime or terrorism. No alerts from the FBI. No federal directives. Every so-called risk indicator was a snap judgment, made in seconds by people who rarely spoke to a passenger for more than 3 sentences. Then Samata filtered the data by race. The number hit her like a punch to the chest. 85.1% of those flagged were people of color. Of that, African descent, 51%, Latin origin, 21%, Middle Eastern and South Asian, 13%. The remainder, non-white, non-European ethnicities. The system didn't declare discrimination, but the numbers didn't lie. She scrolled down, her eyes landing near the bottom of the list. Johnson, Samatha, flagged, behavioral change upon entering Concourse C, a short line. Just vague enough to neutralize any objection. She, a federal agent, holder of high security clearance, never once disciplined, had already been flagged, and that was why the airport security officers had felt so confident detaining her. They believed the system had made the right call. No investigation, no follow-up questions. Just one moment of inconsistent behavior against a white Cager norm, enough to spark suspicion. Samata turned off the screen. But that list didn't vanish from her mind. It wasn't data. It was a hidden map of a kind of power cloaked in algorithms and enforced by human hands. 2 weeks after submitting her leave request, Samata returned to Crest Hill Airport. No announcement, no government badge. She moved like a lost IT staffer, but she was the only one who knew exactly what she was looking for. She didn't enter through the passenger gates or the main security checkpoint. Instead, she passed through the back logistics zone, slipped through a technical access fence, and reached the lower coordination center, the nerve center of the airport's digital network, linking surveillance cameras, internal email servers, and data pulled from the screening terminals. The access card she used belonged to Marcus Lee, a former IT technician who resigned during a suspicious personnel restructuring the year before. Samata had interviewed him once in a previous investigation and kept a copy of his credentials, never expecting she'd one day use them. The room required dual authentication, card swipe, and mechanical code. It took her 10 minutes and 3 incorrect attempts to get it right. But she wasn't nervous. Each second only confirmed what she already suspected. If they had this many layers of protection, something inside had to be worth hiding. The door opened with a soft click and revealed a cool, faintly musty room. An odd mix of aging servers and air circulated around the clock. No personnel. No noise from printers or monitors, just the sterile white light and rows of server racks lining the walls. She didn't touch the main systems. Her goal wasn't where things were meant to be stored. She scanned the temporary file folders, places where data went to be forgotten, unindexed, using search terms like screening, profile, and non-database. She found nothing immediately useful. Then she noticed the old Ricoh copier, an outdated model most airports had replaced years ago. She opened the machine's internal memory tray, the kind no one ever checks because printers are never treated as data sources. Inside was an unnamed folder, with no timestamp or activity log, containing exactly 3 files, 2 PDFs and 1 compressed archive. She unzipped the final file. A single image appeared on screen, angled, unclear who it was addressed to, but the subject line was undeniable. Expanded directive, behavioral groups of concern, not for public release. The sender, screening.directives@tsa.intra. She hadn't even opened the file yet. But the title alone told her she'd reached the core, the place where what isn't written into official reports gets passed around in shortcuts, then abandoned in dusty corners. In the world of ambiguous internal protocols, the most dangerous things aren't formal orders. They're the messages shared once and quietly deleted as if they never existed. Samata sat down, placed her hands on the keyboard, and prepared to read. The email was brief, just 14 lines. No headers, no attachments, no agency logo. A stripped-down metallic set of instructions, every word chosen to be just clear enough for insiders and just vague enough to deny if exposed. There was no mention of people of color, no minorities. Nothing that could be quoted by lawyers in a courtroom. But Samata, who had read thousands of internal directives, reports, and memos, immediately recognized the coded vocabulary of institutional power. Increase screening frequency for passengers exhibiting behavioral mismatch with standard aviation environments. Pay close attention to individuals whose body language appears inconsistent, well-dressed but traveling alone. Prolonged silence or minimal interaction in terminal spaces, internal code, shadow profile, low-risk group requiring periodic monitoring. These phrases seemed clinical, detached, but beneath the surface, they disguised every telltale trait of those who simply didn't conform to the unspoken white norm. Samata didn't need to read further. They were describing people like her, like hundreds of flagged individuals who had done nothing wrong but failed to fit into the soft, invisible mold of acceptable behavior. The final line struck hardest. Definition of threat may be broadened under field conditions. Trust in agent discretion is paramount. Translation: no need for a reason, just a hunch. She slumped in the chair, not in shock, but because she knew this was the core, the ugly truth beneath all the bureaucratic polish. The system didn't need to order discrimination. It only had to create the space where bias could operate like law. Words like protocol, procedure, behavioral analysis were just a polish over quiet, habitual exclusion. She printed the email, backed it up to 2 separate external drives, one stored at a friend's house, the other locked in a bank safety deposit box. Before leaving the server room, she wiped every trace, cleared cache, deleted temporary files, and cleaned the activity logs. Not a footprint left, except for one thing. Something no cleaning could remove, the chilling understanding that the system didn't need to instruct prejudice, it only had to make room for it. A single email that never said discrimination, but had the power to quietly reroute thousands of lives. She stepped out and left the Rico printer behind, still sitting in the shadows where someone once tried to bury a piece of truth like technical garbage. But now that truth was in motion, and it had her name on it. His name was Tyrone Ash, 34 years old, a resident of Detroit. A community activist, he worked on campaigns helping formerly incarcerated youth reintegrate into society. His record was clean. No criminal history, no terrorism watch, no legitimate reason to be flagged. Yet his name appeared in the final line of a buried appendix within the TSA risk profile list Samata decrypted. Alongside it, a single note, injury log. Those last 3 words stopped her cold. Why was there an injury without resistance? Why no charges, yet his name was listed as a threat? And more critically, why had the incident vanished from the media? She didn't search major outlets. She traced Tyrone through back channels, local forums, encrypted group chats in Arizona's legal aid network. Eventually, a user named A. Ash confirmed Tyrone was his brother and had been treated at a private clinic in Glendale just after leaving Phoenix Airport. Samata contacted the clinic, posing as an insurance lawyer. After 3 days, several negotiation calls, and one forged email, she received a full copy of his medical file. The file included a close-up image of Tyrone's face. A cut extended from his left cheekbone to the corner of his mouth, 8 stitches. Swollen, but unmistakable. It didn't look like a punch or blunt trauma. It looked sliced, clean, straight, and deliberate. Under the photo was a handwritten note from the original physician, no longer employed at the clinic. Cut appears at 37-0 angle, not consistent with impact trauma. Clean, even incision suggests a bladed instrument. And further down, patient claimed injury occurred in airport security room, refused to sign police documentation, showed signs of fear when asked for details. Strangest of all was the final comment under medical opinion. Patient requested code be logged 371 D58. Said if anything happened, this would be evidence. Samata stared at the numbers. 371 D58. It didn't match any known medical code, drug ID, or patient classification, but she recognized a structure. Not as a diagnosis, but as an access key, a password, a trigger. The man with nothing left, no recourse but a scar and a cryptic sentence, had turned his injury into a message, a living marker for someone who might one day understand. And now that someone was her. She gripped the printout tightly, not out of fear but out of clarity. The cut wasn't just evidence of violence, it was a question no one had answered. If there are no cameras, no headlines, no voice left to speak, who will translate the wound? Samata returned to the cloned TSA hard drive. Dozens of folders. Only one drew her eye. Redacted _users. Clicking it yielded nothing. No error, no content. Just empty. She hesitated, then typed 371 D58. The moment she hit the last digit, the screen pulsed. A new window appeared. Access granted. One file recovered. Inside was a raw, uncompressed audio file. She pressed play. A man's voice burst out, hoarse, breathless, like someone running while forcing out words. No name, no plea, just one stream of words. Desperate to deposit truth before it disappeared. If someone finds this, please know. I didn't stay quiet because I was guilty. I stayed quiet because I knew there'd be no camera. They said I looked suspicious because I didn't smile at the scanner. They pulled me into a side room. I stayed silent. But they needed me to react. So they pushed. I didn't. They pushed again. Then one of them used something sharp to cut my face. I had no proof but the scar. So I made it a code. I didn't want to be silent like my mother was. If you're hearing this, please don't let it die on a hard drive. That was it. No emotion, no rage, no accusations, which made it hit even harder. Samantha stayed seated. No notes, no words. Her hand clenched. Eyes dry, forehead cold, a quiet ache spread through her, something between anger and sorrow, like brushing against a stranger's memory written in pain. She copied the audio to a third, offline hard drive. She wrote every word by hand because this story wasn't meant to live only in machines. Then she looked out the window. The city was still lit. Flights are still landing. People are still smiling at TSA lines. But somewhere in every stream of travelers, someone was being stopped. Not for what they did, but for how they looked. Tyrone knew that, and instead of fists, he left behind a code, a scar, a voice, a message that didn't need belief, only someone to find it. And Samata understood. Sometimes the greatest resistance isn't shouting, it's refusing to let a wound become meaningless. Samata sat before the screen, surrounded by stacks of printed documents from the TSA's public records database. She had seen many strange statistical patterns in her career in internal investigations, but nothing ever felt as suspiciously clean as this. So flawless it raised doubt. 12 quarterly reports, spanning from early 2021 to late 2023. Each report was professionally formatted. Charts, performance metrics, and year-over-year comparison. Categories like total random screenings, suspicious behavior detection rate, and average incident response time all fluctuated logically. But one line never changed throughout 12 quarters, and it was always bolded. Complaints resolved, internal faults acknowledged, 0, 0, none. Perfectly round, unbroken. No employee errors, no acknowledged complaints, no internal disciplinary report, no admission of misconduct, procedural violations, or unprofessional behavior for 3 consecutive years. Samata knew this well. The cleaner the paper, the filthier the truth behind it. She began cross-checking other data sources. Places where the public could file complaints outside of official channels, letters sent directly to the Citizen Affairs Office, emails from open feedback systems, anonymous submissions from local human rights organizations, and especially a confidential data set a TSA engineer had shared with her during the early stages of her investigation. The official number of TSA complaints in 3 years was only 26, but in her internal files, the real number was 614, over 23 times higher than the reported figure. She randomly selected one case. Male passenger, U.S. citizen, Middle Eastern background. Name, Karim al-Said, detained for 3 hours in an isolation room. Reason, unstable eye contact with TSA officer. No video, no audio. No incident report. Internal note read, no misconduct found. The officer followed standard protocol. Conclusion, no internal fault. Case closed. Samata sat in silence. The reason for detention had been based on a perceived look, something no one had to prove. She kept comparing reports. A pattern became clear. All rejected complaints bore the final sign-off of the same 3 people, the internal review unit at Crest Hill Airport. Their names appeared across every report. Sandra Kellerman, head of feedback evaluation, Martin Chu, shift manager, Lucas Avery, chief of internal oversight. 3 people, 3 signatures, 3 positions oversee every gray zone between complaint and judgment. Samantha reviewed their personnel records. Each had been involved directly or indirectly in past incidents where victims never followed up. One had been accused of yelling at a passenger, but the complaint was later withdrawn. Another had been caught on video touching someone inappropriately, but the footage could not be found. One had been near the holding room when Tyrone Ash's face was slashed, but the report stated, not present at the scene. Samata sighed and pushed the stack of reports aside. This system didn't need one mastermind. It only needed 3 gatekeepers, controlling entry, exit, and deletion. What was more disturbing was that they didn't even bother faking transparency because they had already created something that looked more genuine than the truth. Statistics that showed absolute flawlessness. 0. Not one error. Not one accountable name. But that number was no longer innocent. It was the first sign, a system keeping itself clean by silencing others. Samata's eyes stopped on the Q4 report from last year, the final section, usually reserved for technical notes and reporting convention. But this time, one italicized line in a smaller font made her freeze. All unverified feedback shall be considered invalid. Officer misconduct data will default to 0 unless prompted by a federal investigation. Not an official rule. Not in any TSA handbook. Not in any training document. But there it was, printed, recorded, enforced like an underground policy. A flawless machine. If no one launched a federal investigation, no violations existed. No names named, no headlines published, no one raising their voice, and the number 0 stayed, quietly masking layers of silenced stories beneath its polished white gloss. Samita closed the file and leaned back in her chair. Outside the glass window, light rain began tapping gently on the glass, steady, rhythmic, patient, like truth knocking. She sat still. In her hand was a printout, clear, plain, undramatic, no accusations. Just a number repeated quarter after quarter, year after year, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. No fault acknowledged, no one is held accountable, no record noting any officer wrongdoing. But it was that very silence, so smooth, that made Samita shudder, because now she understood. When a system claims to be perfectly clean, that's when it's hiding the most refined kind of corruption, violation by manipulating the standard itself. She marked the pages and prepared 3 copies, one to keep, one for a civil rights law team she had worked with in Atlanta, and one for an independent journalist she had assisted in a Baltimore tax evasion case. No long email, no dramatic summary, just one attached sentence. Statistics that are too clean are the dirtiest kind. She knew after today the number 0 would no longer be the silence it used to represent. Not proof of innocence, but the first sign of a system where manipulation had become standard. And, if anyone was sharp enough, they would understand. The constant absence of wrongdoing is the clearest signal that no one is ever held responsible. She didn't need to accuse anyone yet, didn't need to make the evidence public. Not yet. But the doors were beginning to open, and what people would see first wasn't a scandal. It would be a spreadsheet. Cold, quiet, and fabricated to perfection. News of Chief Wilbur Clay's death passed through the media almost without a trace. The coverage amounted to a few brief lines buried in the weekend column. Wilbur Clay, the former head of security at Crest Hill Airport, was found dead at his residence. Cause of death identified as suicide following prolonged work stress. No public funeral, no detailed autopsy report released. The internal file was simply marked closed. No further questions were asked. Samita had once skimmed past his name like it was background noise, until she found a system report that had been left behind, not stored on any official servers. It contained one lone note tied to a technical request no one else had mentioned. Request to restore full internal camera data for Concourse C prior to firmware update 3.1. Reason: cross-check overlapping frames from June 3 and June 5. Signed, Wilbur Clay. She paused for a long moment. Firmware 3.1 was an official update, but it had been rolled out just hours after a black passenger reported being excessively interrogated and was forced to delete video footage from their phone. Asking to restore footage prior to the update meant someone wanted to see what was really there before the new version replaced it. She started looking into Clay's death. The forensics report said acute poisoning from an uncontrolled combination of benzodiazepines and hard liquor. The condition was described as rapid respiratory failure, no signs of struggle, no significant external injuries. But at the very bottom was a line easy to overlook: faint circular bruise on left side of neck, origin undetermined. Samita knew too well. People don't just fall and leave a bruise directly over the carotid artery, and there's no reason for that detail to be ignored in a suicide case. She tracked down his youngest son, Marcus Clay, now working customs at a southern airport. After a few indirect calls, they met at a small cafe in the suburbs. Marcus was guarded at first, but eventually opened up. My dad wasn't depressed. He had just started drafting a letter to the Department of Justice. I remember he told me, "Someone's messed with the recording system. There are clips repeating for no reason, and no one in tech is owning up to it." Samita asked, "That was the last time you saw him?" Marcus nodded. The next morning, I got a call from a neighbor. He was found in his study. Door unlocked, lights on, half a glass of whiskey, no note. But the printouts about the footage? No one investigated. No scene review. No second autopsy. The case was closed in 36 hours. A record speed if the goal was to bury it. She left the meeting with her thoughts spinning, as if a new map was forming, one that showed not only civilians were being silenced, but insiders too, if they dared break the pact of complicity. Wilbur Clay had tried to speak up, not with a press conference, not with a public declaration, but by signing a technical request, small, but enough to shine light on the surveillance system, and for that, he was no longer alive. Samata wrote at the edge of her file in red ink, not suicide, eliminated. 2 days after meeting Clay's son, Samata used a secure channel to request a full forensic report. It came via encrypted delivery from a former internal investigator who owed her a favor. At first glance, the report looked ordinary. The victim's name, cause of death, and scene condition. But when run through forensic analysis software, the details began to align. In the autopsy photos, she isolated the faint bruise on the neck, marked vaguely as unidentified trauma. But when matched with a vascular map, it sat precisely on the left carotid artery, right where consistent pressure could cause unconsciousness or internal injury. The bruise angle, measured by the tool, formed a diagonal line upward, 20 degrees off-center. Conclusion, not from a sideways fall, and definitely not from slumping at a desk. Samata typed a quiet note into the file. Deliberately inflicted, technique used to avoid bone fracture. But she didn't release it. She knew making a claim without foundation would only brand her as a reckless whistleblower. One bruise wasn't enough. She needed to know who ordered the cover-up and why. She reopened a 6-month-old anonymous email from a masked internal TSA address. Subject, draft_request. The first line hit like a blow. No need to delete the full footage. Just render 20 key seconds and no one will question it. Clay's asking too many questions. No name, no signature, but the tone was clearly a technician, someone who knew how to manipulate without setting off alarms. Samata sat still. Wilbur Clay hadn't taken his own life. He had died because he uncovered the truth about the system he once ran, a system that pretended to be neutral but was actually maintained by those who knew how to erase evidence before anyone noticed. His death wasn't a message to the public, it was a warning to people like her. Knowing too much and still breathing is not something this system allows. She didn't call the press, didn't alert the bureau, didn't share a word on any official channel. Instead, she saved everything into a specially encrypted folder labeled K-Lie No, not because it was empty, but because it had been made to disappear. She added a handwritten note, a quiet oath. If a death is wrongly named, the system that named it must be renamed too. Then she shut down her machine, checked her drives. 3 backups, one at home, one in a bank vault, one sent to the anonymous tech who once gave her the misflagged passenger list. She knew this journey would bring no applause, no audience, no tidy resolution. But if the system thought it had buried the last voice with a death report, then it had underestimated the one still alive. Samata's incident at Crest Hill Airport at first looked like an isolated clash, one person's prejudice against another, a moment of bias mistaken for routine security. But the deeper she went, the wider the picture grew. It wasn't just about one white woman making a false accusation and one overzealous officer reacting too quickly. It was a pattern, structured, repeatable, systematized, with disturbing precision. From internal complaint records, Samata identified a recurring name in non-prosecutable security incidents. Skybridge Essentials, a seemingly harmless chain of convenience stores selling travel gear and electronics, with locations in over 40 major U.S. airports. The strange part? Most false theft reports came from Skybridge employees. In several cases, they claimed missing items even when no transaction or suspicious activity had been logged. Yet airport security always responded immediately, and not once had a Skybridge employee faced disciplinary action or reassignment. Samata compiled the cases from the last 18 months. 7 incidents showed clear signs of false accusation. 6 of the individuals involved were black. 1 was Latino. 4 cases occurred at airports, with public partnerships overseeing retail zones. In 2 high-profile cases, Denver and Houston, the surveillance footage for the affected area malfunctioned for exactly 3 minutes during the confrontation. When Samata dug deeper into Skybridge's ownership, one name emerged: Kenton Miles Capital, a New York-based investment firm specializing in airport infrastructure, logistics real estate, and notably non-aeronautical service contracts, including TSA staffing and airport operations partnerships. She located a memorandum of understanding between Kenton Miles and Crest Hill's executive board, stored from an internal audit 3 years prior. It read, Kenton Miles agrees to co-fund commercial zone upgrades from 20 to 12026 in exchange for priority in managing passenger flow and behavioral oversight in commercial interaction areas. The phrase behavioral oversight in commercial interaction areas had no formal definition. It made no mention of law enforcement or legal authority, yet it granted brand staff the power to report suspicious conduct without evidence, and TSA was obligated to act. Samata reread that line 3 times. Not a single word violated the law, no direct reference to race. Nothing illegal, and that's what made it dangerous. A financial agreement written in the language of partnership, but harboring a new kind of authority, the right to decide who looks out of place. And if someone seemed unusual just because of their skin color, accent, gait, or gaze, this system wouldn't protect them. It would flag them, detain them, and call it procedure. She closed the folder. Her forehead was cold, but her hands were steady. She had just traced the line from a shop assistant's disdainful glance all the way to a millionaire investor's boardroom. A system without guns, without warrants, just privileged access to report and a system trained to obey. A few days after uncovering the link between Kenton Miles and the false reporting incidents, Samata found a case file nearly erased from a civil lawsuit in Illinois the year before. A black passenger, Malik Greaves, had sued Skybridge Essentials for wrongful accusation and being held for 92 minutes in a security room. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence of discriminatory intent. Skybridge's legal team argued it was a procedural misunderstanding. No measurable harm occurred. No one reviewed the cameras. No independent inquiry. TSA refused to comment, citing, "The incident occurred in a commercial zone." But in the case's appendix, Samata discovered an audio file crossed out from official evidence due to uncertain legal origin. The clip was captured by a pocket recorder Malik carried unintentionally during his detainment. Voices in the recording said, "You sure about this? You didn't really see him holding anything. Report it anyway. TSA'll handle it. If we don't flag them, they'll keep pushing." Let him sweat. People like that never escalate. People like that. No explicit slur, but everyone in the room knew what it meant. Those who don't fit the mold of polite, non-confrontational, compliant with authority. Samata froze at the phrase, "let them sweat." It wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Said by someone with no arrest authority, but with the right contact to trigger the system's response. She returned to the Crest Hill Kenton Miles agreement and found another short clause. The sponsor shall receive priority in contributing feedback on passenger conduct at high-value commercial zones. The word feedback wasn't defined, but in practice, every time a Skybridge staffer filed a suspicion report, TSA responded within 3 minutes, a speed not guaranteed even for real assault victims. Every reaction, every escalation, was wrapped in procedural language. But this wasn't the process. It was instinct. Of a system trained to trust power first and doubt difference second. Samata mapped it all into one simple diagram. Kenton Miles funds the airport, Skybridge controls retail spaces and holds behavioral reporting privileges. TSA receives the silent directive to prioritize incidents in sponsored zones. The accused, mostly people of color, have no footage, no proof, no defense, no law needed, no policy document, no racist statute, just contracts, funding flows, and a few well-placed employees who know exactly who to watch. Samita closed the file. On the cover, she wrote, "Privilege isn't written in law, but the system enforces it like it is. No one needs to issue a ban on black passengers. You just give suspicion power to the right people." His name was Isaac Reeds, one of the most seasoned agents in the FBI's Northeast Division, and the man who had mentored Samantha from her first day in the field. To her, Isaac wasn't just a superior. He was the one who taught her the first real lesson. Don't trust the report until you've seen the scene yourself. They had been through difficult missions together, from tracking extremists in Minnesota to the attempted assassination in Baltimore in 2017. During a chaotic raid, it was Isaac who shielded her from the first spray of bullets, a moment that would later appear in the official report in the blandest terms: tactical movement consistent with formation protocol. She never forgot that, and when she began this investigation, the first warning email she received, no address, no signature, contained a code only those in Tactical Response Unit 3H would know. Isaac was one of the 4 who ever used that code. A week ago, he reached out again, this time no anonymity. His voice was steady, reserved, as always. "I've been tracking this. Whatever support you need, say it. But make it quick, someone's watching you." She didn't hesitate. Cautious but trusting, she agreed to meet at an old warehouse once used to transfer classified files during counterinsurgency operations. He arrived on time, dressed in plain clothes, still had that upright posture, the weathered face, and eyes that never blinked more than twice, like a man who hated wasting words. In his hand was an external hard drive. No small talk. He placed it on the decaying wooden table and plugged it into her laptop. This is the full access log from the backup server that night. The main system's been wiped, but the temporary cache from the regional coordinator's terminal wasn't touched. Data streamed across the screen. Commands, IPs, timestamps, digital signatures. It all confirmed one thing. The deletion order didn't come from Central Command, but from a substation with elevated override privileges. Not something TSA staff had access to. The deletion had been executed by a technician previously assigned to the TSA under an FBI internal security augmentation program. The evidence was airtight. Too airtight. She looked at Isaac. "Where did you get this?" He smiled, barely. "Same old place, right?" It sounded warm, but something in his eyes unsettled her. The way he looked at her, like someone who had helped, but was also measuring her response. It was no longer the clear, unfiltered look of a teammate. Not entirely. Samita kept her expression steady, but a memory stirred of the one time Isaac had refused to show her the full after-action report from a prior mission. When she asked, he'd said, "Not necessary." Back then, she believed him. Now, she wasn't so sure. In a world where truth gets rewritten at every access point, the most suspicious data isn't what gets deleted, it's what arrives just in time. She picked up the drive, said nothing, and for the first time in 10 years of knowing him, his handshake didn't feel like solidarity. 3 nights later, Samita received a file with no name, sent from a spoofed internal address. She opened it in an air-gapped device, checked the signature. It was a redacted report, most of it blacked out, but not well. Using text layer recovery software and reconstruction algorithms, she decrypted the obscured lines. After a few minutes, one phrase surfaced like a cold blade. "Approved by Isaac R." She stared at the name. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be fake. She opened the technical authorization logs, where access tokens were stored. The deletion key used to erase the security footage from Concourse C at exactly 9:42 p.m. matched the personal clearance code issued to Isaac Reeds when he was the technical coordinator and internal security advisor. No doubt remained. The one who authorized the deletion was... She sat for a long time, her hand resting on the very hard drive Isaac had given her. Inside was the restored evidence, the data that pushed her forward. But now she saw it for what it was, not proof, but reins, a guided trail. Isaac knew she'd go digging deeper, so he handed her just enough rope. She thought it was a rescue line. It was a tether, and if she pulled too far, it would snap her back. She called. Isaac picked up after 3 rings. She wasn't angry, didn't yell, just asked one question: why? The voice on the other end had no hesitation. No more warmth, just calm, tired steel. Because the institution needs to survive. You know that. A scandal like this, another one, would destroy the credibility we built. I'm not protecting them. I'm protecting the structure we once believed in. She didn't answer, but the sigh through the receiver landed like a dull blade. Her reply came slowly, each word pressed down. You taught me to investigate with integrity. You said justice had no gray zones. So now you think fairness means sacrificing truths that might hurt the system? Isaac said nothing. The silence stretched. Then the line went dead. She didn't call back. Didn't need to. The worst kind of betrayal isn't the kind that wears a mask. It's the one that once sat beside you in briefing rooms, helped you write your first report, pointed out what was real and what was false, and then, once you see the truth clearly, becomes the first to ask you to close your eyes for stability, for structure, for public confidence. She sat in the dark, the room unlit. Only the screen glowed, casting its pale light onto her face, a face now stripped of any doubt between disappointment and fury. What remained was resolve. Isaac once saved her from a hail of bullets, but now he had aimed for something else. Not her body, but her faith, and that bullet, she would not let it miss. His name was Raymond Choi, a maintenance engineer for the secondary camera system at Crest Hill Airport, a name never mentioned in leadership meetings. A quiet face walking the halls of the technical wing, long forgotten by anyone trying to recall the last time he spoke. For the past 6 years, Raymond had held the only key to access the buffer storage system, an overlooked data layer, where temporary video footage was held for 72 hours before being synced to the central server, or automatically deleted. After the incident involving Samata Johnson, during a scheduled system maintenance, per administrative language, Raymond noticed one camera feed from Terminal C had been overridden abnormally. The timestamp remained intact, but the data structure had been compressed like a clumsy patch job. He wasn't an activist. He didn't have a need to save anyone. But when he opened the surviving cache fragment, he saw Samata not resisting, not struggling, simply being dragged away in silence. Eyes turned, phones raised. A few murmurs, and then everything faded into darkness as if it had never happened. Raymond sat quietly in front of the screen. He'd seen people pulled from lines before. Some screamed. Some cursed, some collapsed, but no one was like her, so calm, so helpless, as if knowing that speaking up would only deepen the invisible charge someone had already stamped on her forehead. He decided to back up the footage onto a portable hard drive, not because he saw himself as a hero, but because doing nothing made it hard to breathe. He planned to send it to Samata via an anonymous email, but he never got the chance. A day later, he was called into HR. No warning, no legal rep. He was taken to a white room, greeted by a single manager and a thin folder. The reason for termination was clearly printed: violation of data security protocol, unauthorized access to system storage. No mention of the video, no inquiry into what he took, no criminal charges. Everything happened fast, cold, and clean. They just needed him out of the system before the footage got out of the hard drive. Raymond didn't argue, didn't beg. He simply nodded and signed the termination form. But instead of going home, he detoured to an old luggage shop once contracted to repair airport suitcases. He bought a scratched, wheel-broken suitcase with its bottom lining intact. He knew he couldn't send an email anymore, couldn't use cloud storage, couldn't transfer through internal networks. Those routes left trails, but one thing didn't: lost luggage. Raymond taped the hard drive to the suitcase's bottom lining, hand-stitched the fabric back in place, and went straight to the airport. He checked the suitcase in as unclaimed baggage, no name, no booking code, no paperwork. He wasn't sure if Samata would receive it. I wasn't sure it would survive the sorting process. But at least he left a door open before the system locked everything down. 3 days after being terminated, Raymond Choi returned to Crest Hill Airport with the same suitcase. No ticket, no flight, no specific reason. He stood quietly at the lost luggage desk, observing the procedures as if weighing whether to submit a memory rather than a possession. The suitcase was chipped, its handle worn, wheels broken, no brand tag. But the most important thing was inside, and only someone who knew how to read it would understand its value. He didn't say much, just placed the suitcase on the table, pulled a small handwritten note from his pocket, and slipped it into the handle slot. No name, no contact, just one line like a memory trigger. Cress Hill, 12C, 3:46 p.m., the day she was dragged away. No one at the counter asked questions. They processed it like any other lost item, tagged it, logged it, and moved it into the sorting system. Raymond left right after. No turning back. No need to see who would find it. He had done his part. The last piece the system hadn't taken from him. 3 days later, Samatha received an email with no subject line. The sender used an anonymous address, the username a jumble of device serial numbers, and a fragment of an internal IP. The email contained no message, no words, just one attachment, a photo of an old paper luggage tag, exactly the kind issued at Crest Hill Airport's Lost and Found. The writing matched perfectly. Crest Hill-12C-3:46 p.m., the day she was dragged away. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the realization that someone inside the system hadn't let go, someone still lucid enough to leave a trace, offline, unlogged, untraceable. That afternoon, Samatha visited the Lost and Found. No suit, no FBI badge. She simply showed the photo and told the clerk, "I'm here to claim an item with no declared owner. Can you check for any suitcase that matches this tag?" The attendant hesitated briefly, but protocol was protocol. With a matching image and tag, the item could be released without identifying the owner. 10 minutes later, a scuffed silver suitcase was wheeled out from storage. Samatha opened it on sight, only to verify. Inside, nothing of apparent value. An old button-up shirt, a faded user manual for outdated camera equipment, tangled charging cables. But under the lining, beneath the fabric, was what she'd come for, a silver external hard drive, unmarked with a small handwritten label, "Buffer 2, not synced." She didn't open it at the airport, only asked one question: who dropped this off? The clerk shook his head. Asian man, middle-aged, wore a mask, left no info, but from how he placed the suitcase and positioned it to avoid early scanning, I think he knew this system well. Samatha nodded, said nothing more. She signed for the claim and held the suitcase like something only she understood, a message with no sound, a memory that didn't travel with passengers, a part of the truth, thought to be erased, had slipped through the cracks, dodged the machinery, and waited in silence for the one who needed it most. Samatha received the call at 2:17 a.m., a time typically reserved for death notices, or things no one dares to put in writing. The screen showed a 3-digit internal number. No name, no area code, no way to trace it. She sat up without turning on the light, answering with her left hand out of habit, ready to listen without showing a reaction. A man's voice came through, deep, clear, unmistakable, each word sounding like it had been rehearsed hundreds of times before being spoken. "This is a secure line. No recording, no automatic logging." She remained silent. A quiet breath followed, as if the speaker had drawn in just enough air through his teeth to stay composed. Then he continued, "I know you've received the hard drive, and I know what's on it. I also know who helped you and who's no longer in their previous position." His voice carried no anger, no urgency, but each word landed with the weight of stones dropped to block a path. Samatha didn't reply. She simply listened, because people in power don't call at 2 a.m. to apologize or check in. The man went on, his tone slower now, almost instructional. "I'm not calling to threaten. I'm not calling to stop you. I just want you to understand what you're about to do is unlike any investigation you've ever pursued." A pause, not to catch her breath, but to force her to weigh each word. Then he added, "You think you've broken the network. Fine. You've got logs, you've got images, you've got names, but you haven't broken the most dangerous part, a system that has learned to reject the idea that it can be wrong. Samatha gripped the phone tightly. His voice wasn't cold, it wasn't cruel, it didn't carry criminal threats or manipulative pressure, but that very calmness, the way he spoke as if merely stating a law of physics, tightened her chest. Because he didn't have to deny anything. He didn't have to evade. Everything was already too clear to warrant denial. "We can fire a few people," he continued. "Discipline a few TSA employees. Cut ties with a few contractors, but the system stays intact because it doesn't run on commands. It runs on silence." And loyalty to comfort landed like a tap on the forehead, echoing the reasoning long used by law enforcement and media alike. To delay justice. Don't stir public unrest. Don't shake trust in the institution. Don't create chaos. Samatha closed her eyes. She knew she wasn't being threatened. She was being given an out, a chance to withdraw without being labeled a traitor, to step away without blame, to live with the truth everyone knew but refused to name. And for that very reason, she could not stay silent, because if a system survives on silence, then one person refusing to be quiet is enough to break the gear. She said nothing. The caller didn't wait. Only the sound of a call disconnecting remained, soft, decisive, like a period closing a sentence of polite complicity. After the call, Samatha didn't go back to sleep. She sat by the window, her laptop screen casting a faint reflection of a face that no longer looked surprised, but had not yet calmed. She reopened the hard drive, opened each folder, reread every technical log, every backup file, every hidden from the main interface clip. No more cross-checking was needed. Everything was clear, nothing left to doubt. What left her speechless wasn't that someone had intervened to erase data, it was how seamlessly it had happened. No command, no meeting, no one pounding the table. A maintenance worker was fired. An engineer was reassigned, a cop transferred to a different zone. A witness who recorded a video received a friendly call. Every piece moved like a script without a director. Everyone knew their role, their lines, and most importantly, when to stay silent. She remembered the final line from the call. "You've broken the network, but not the collective silence." That wasn't a threat. It was a diagnosis, an acknowledgement that the system had grown old enough to protect itself with habit, and its most dangerous habit was this: no reaction, no confirmation, no denial, just no answer. She had once believed that evidence alone would trigger justice, but now she understood. Some truths don't die because they're hidden, but because no one is willing to admit their problems. No one shouts, "This is wrong." They just nod, file it away, and move on. And so the system endures, not because it's right, but because no one has the will to chase the truth to the end. Samantha rested her hands on the desk, staring at the screen, not with the eyes of a federal agent, but of a regular person, asking, "Am I alone in this? Is there someone on the other end in a brightly lit office deep within this numb machine who feels ashamed?" She had no answer. All she knew was this: a 2 a.m. call on an unrecorded line with no public content was itself proof that someone at the top knew everything and chose to keep it silent. And because of that, Samatha decided not to wait. She launched the encryption software and extracted the clip from Terminal C, cutting the exact moment she was dragged away, expressionless, unflinching, and inserted it into a short slideshow, accompanied by a full summary of the documents. She didn't send it straight to the press. Instead, she shared it with every independent civil rights office, every federal oversight committee, and every group that had been ignored when calling for law enforcement transparency. Not to create a scandal, but to force the system to confront what it refused to see, and force a reaction, because this time, silence would no longer be an option. All of the files Samatha had collected, deleted access logs, internal TSA technical documentation, unsynced video segments, even an email hidden in the copier's temp memory, were submitted intact to the Federal Committee on Executive Oversight Procedures. Not through the FBI, not through the Department of Justice. No permission requested. She submitted them under her own name, as a citizen who was once an agent, now a witness. The hearing was held publicly, broadcast live on national television. Public opinion split sharply. One side saw her as someone sabotaging institutional trust. The other called her the first person brave enough to push open the door everyone knew was off limits. In front of her sat more than 10 committee members, bipartisan, joined by legal experts and civil rights advisors. On the other side, 3 lawyers representing the TSA, FBI, and Kenton Miles Corporation, the same people who'd been absent during technical briefings but now appeared armed with thick binders to defend procedure. From the first minute, Samita was placed on the defensive. One lawmaker, not even looking at her, asked, "You're accusing an interagency network involving hundreds of people based solely on a video without a complete timestamp and a few unidentified documents?" Another interrupted before she could respond, "We're here to investigate facts, not become a theater for emotion. So, what's your real motive?" Samantha didn't flinch, but she realized the truth was being trapped not in a data vault, but a psychological one, reframing the story from evidence to emotion, from systemic to personal. She presented verified logs, technical analysis, and surveillance trace maps. She showed encrypted files validated by independent experts, but the room stayed cold. Most of the committee looked at her like someone making excuses after taking things too personally. Tension spiked when TSA's team proposed bringing in an independent rebuttal expert, a security advisor previously on contract with Kenton Miles. The hearing was about to veer off track. Then, just as the chair was preparing to shift to open rebuttals, a young assistant ran in and handed him a paper envelope. Inside was a USB. The chair frowned. The sender wasn't an organization, not a journalist, just a single name, Eleanor Davison, widow of Wilbur Clay, the former airport chief who died over a year ago in an unexplained car crash. Inside the note, handwritten, "My husband left this behind before he died. I kept it to myself, but when I saw this hearing, I knew I couldn't keep it any longer." The room went silent. The chair glanced at his legal counsel. A faint nod. He inserted the USB and broadcast the feed to the main screen. The audio began, unclear at first, but the words were unmistakable. "The flagged ones will never get a real chance. We don't need them to do anything wrong. We just need them quiet and different looking. That's enough to trigger the system. Kill the commercial zone cameras for 20 minutes, then sync from 5:15. No one will notice." The next line froze the entire room. "If anyone finds out, shift the blame to the on-site supervisor. The system doesn't remember who was wrong, only who stayed quiet." Samantha didn't turn around, but she felt it. Something in the hearing room had changed. It was no longer aligned with silence. She didn't need anyone to defend her. The evidence had spoken for itself, and for the first time, she wasn't the only one speaking. The air shifted. One lawmaker removed their glasses. A legal advisor looked down. The TSA's attorney, for the first time, stopped taking notes. When the recording ended, the chamber was soaked in a kind of silence, thick, inescapable. Not the defensive silence from earlier, but the kind born when there's no longer a reasonable excuse to deny what's been exposed. Every question about motive, emotional bias, or timed evacuacy shattered in an instant, like someone had dropped a heavy stone into a lake kept still for far too long. Samantha didn't turn her head, but she heard it all. Pens set down, paper folded, chairs shifting, like the entire room had to physically readjust to a weight it could no longer ignore. One committee member, the same who had interrupted her about public trust, said nothing now, only stared at the black screen that had just finished playing the recording. The chair, neutral until now, leaned slightly forward and struck his gavel once against the table. "We'll recess for 15 minutes. The new material must be independently verified." But no one stood up. No one left their seat. No phones came out, as they usually did. Even the TSA attorney, who had once smirked when Samantha spoke about an invisible network of bias, now sat bowed, unconsciously twisting a pen with no idea what to write next. No further rebuttal was needed. A single audio clip from someone with no legal credentials, no title, no professional standing, had done what dozens of formal reports couldn't. Eleanor Davison, a widow, didn't use the word conspiracy, didn't accuse, didn't express hate, just a fatigue and a final, quiet admission. I've held onto this for over a year. I was afraid the press would think I was exploiting my grief, but when I saw the video of Miss Samatha being dragged away without a single question asked, I knew I couldn't keep it anymore. If I did, I'd become part of the system that killed my husband. It wasn't a testimony, it was an obituary for the trust people like her once had in the system. Samatha nodded slightly, without looking at anyone. There was no feeling of victory, just something settling, the knowledge that she was no longer alone in this fight. The hearing wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. Not because she had won, but because others had begun to speak. And this time, they weren't speaking to apologize. They were speaking to withdraw from complicity. At the back of the room, a stenographer paused, leaned toward an assistant and whispered, "First time I've seen someone say so little and leave a room with nothing left to say." Samatha stepped away from the hearing bench. She didn't look into the cameras, but all the lenses followed her, not as a symbol of controversy, but as a bridge between what no one dared name and what could no longer be ignored. She didn't close the hearing with a statement. No need to raise her voice. Because, for the first time since being dragged from Concourse C, the system was listening, not through transcripts, but through the people who had once upheld it. The official name of the bill was the Passenger Fairness and Accountability Act, abbreviated as PFAA, a title that sounded mild, even diplomatic, but its contents were powerful enough to force an entire system to rethink its standard operations. The bill rested on three main pillars. 1. Requiring the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, to publish passenger screening data disaggregated by race, gender, and behavioral category on a quarterly basis. 3. Mandating independent camera installations in all airport private screening rooms, with footage stored in a system inaccessible to on-site personnel for editing or deletion. And 3. Granting an independent civilian agency the authority to audit, access, and respond to complaints of discriminatory behavior in airport commercial zones. From the very first round of public commentary, PFAA was met with intense backlash. A block of conservative lawmakers labeled it an emotion-driven bill that could put security officers under constant suspicion and undermine their decisiveness in real-time threats. Others were more blunt in their critique. We cannot let the personal feelings of a few individuals dictate how we protect millions of travelers every day. Airports need decisiveness, not emotional equity metrics, but the opposition was met with equally fierce public outrage. Leaked videos, especially the moment Samatha was dragged from Terminal C, and an audio clip involving the wife of a police officer who had participated in improper filtering tactics, sparked waves of protests, open letters, and voting campaigns, led by hundreds of civil rights organizations. Media coverage split down the middle. One side called PFAA the first step toward shackling national security. The other called it the mirror the system refuses to face. In the days leading up to the vote, many believed the bill would fail. The numbers leaned toward the opposition. But on the morning of the decisive vote, a representative from Wisconsin, formerly an air traffic controller and previously neutral, stood to speak. "No one here is against keeping airports safe, but if our safety system is built on feelings instead of facts, we are manufacturing a new kind of fear, and one day someone you love will be the one pulled into a room with no explanation required." That single statement echoed through the chamber, not shouted, but sharp enough to shift the balance. The vote that followed was one of the most tense on record. Final result, PFAA passed with 218 votes in favor, 215 against, a victory by just 3 votes. No one clapped. The room felt heavy, as though a quiet war had just ended. Reporters aimed their lenses at the figure they considered central to the moment, but Samatha remained still, hands folded, not rising, not nodding. She knew this day marked a turning point, but not a triumph. It was only the first fracture in a wall built from decades of quiet consent. The next morning, Samatha was invited to Capitol Hill for a small ceremony, a brief, symbolic gesture to honor her courageous contribution to the passage of the PFAA. The event took place in a side conference room. Not many attendees, but enough fresh flowers, neatly arranged chairs, pastries, and media waiting in the hallway, as if history had just been written. A representative from the Civil Rights Committee opened with a formal tribute. We owe her a thank you. Without Samantha Johnson, no one would have dared question a system we assumed was fair by default. Eyes turned to her, a few nods. Several phones lifted, ready to record. The ceremony host extended a hand, inviting her to the podium. Samantha stood up, but didn't walk forward, didn't take the mic, didn't leave her seat. She spoke from where she stood, her voice steady, neither loud nor soft. I didn't come here to celebrate. I don't need a day named after me. I don't need applause. I need real change. The room froze. No one had predicted that. Everything was in place for a neatly packaged moment. Spotlights, a feel-good quote, extended clapping to tuck the matter into polite memory. But the central figure had stepped out of the script. No theatrics, no performance. Samantha bowed slightly. No further words. She walked out of the room, past the hallway lined with raised cameras. A reporter called her name. Someone reached out with a mic. But she didn't stop. Her pace was steady, her gaze unshaken, as if the moment the bill passed, she had already left the table, where others were still dealing cards. She knew what had been signed wasn't a broom to sweep away a tangled system. It was a small speed bump, forcing the smooth wheels of unchecked authority to slow, to swerve, to look closer. It wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it would make those who intended to misuse power think twice, because now wrongdoing could be monitored, questioned, and exposed. She also knew laws don't change people, but they make those who abuse power do more math, more hesitation, more reckoning. They force the system to face those it once silenced. Laws are not salvation, they're barriers. But because of them, one day the person flagged for the color of their skin or the wrong kind of look will have a chance to stand instead of breaking in silence. Samantha didn't need to become a symbol. She didn't want statues or books praising her. She just wanted the next generation not to wonder why they were questioned more than others without anyone having to answer for it. And if the system couldn't change immediately, it could no longer pretend it wasn't being watched by someone who wasn't waiting for applause. 2 weeks after the historic hearing, Samantha walked into the administrative office of the FBI's Eastern Division, not to report progress, not to answer memos, and certainly not to justify anything anymore. She came for one reason only, to submit her resignation. A plain brown envelope, no subject line, no note on the flap, inside a single sheet of A4 paper. One sentence, typed in the system's default font, I resign because I no longer believe this system can fix itself from within. No emotion, no disappointment, no mention of her contributions, no request for acknowledgement. No one in the office said a word. A few nodded as she passed, not in farewell, but in quiet recognition that this exit was right. None had the courage to follow. There was no internal announcement, no farewell email, no closed-door meeting to preserve the agency's image. She knew if they kept her, they'd have to face too many unresolved files, too many unreviewed security tapes, too many questions about how an agent like her ended up in airport isolation with no official record. Samantha left quietly, but the silence was her loudest statement. She was no longer part of the system, and no longer under the reputation blanket the agency used to cover its rot. Packing up took exactly 1 hour. She didn't own much. A Mont Blanc pen from the Atlanta campaign, a few notebooks filled with old access codes, and one thick file she had never uploaded to the system. The final item was her FBI badge, metal, worn with her for over a decade, now resting in a soft case. She closed the box without shaking, placed it back on the desk, and walked away without taking it. No goodbye letter, no farewell party. No one needed to stop her. That evening, she made her first post from a new personal account, non-government, no FBI logo. Just one line, I'm no longer a federal agent, but I never stopped serving. I've simply chosen a new way. The words spread faster than she expected. Within hours, thousands of shares, tens of thousands of quotes. A few former colleagues messaged privately. I understand. None posted publicly. Some from the old system mocked her, called her self-righteous, accused her of attention-seeking. But most were ordinary people, those who'd been pulled into interrogation rooms without records, who were stopped at checkpoints for not smiling at the scanner. For the first time, someone hadn't just withdrawn. They'd stepped out to confront. Samantha replied to no one. She opened her laptop and titled a new project. No federal backing, no jurisdiction code, no special clearance, just fire. And this time, no badge, just truth. 3 weeks after leaving the FBI, she launched an independent organization, Clearport Watch. No banners, no empty slogans, no PR team. The name wasn't chosen for impact. It was chosen to remind everyone where it all began. The scanners, the places where people are treated like data, and data is manipulated like a weapon. Clearport Watch didn't register in D.C., didn't rent a downtown suite. She chose a basement in Newark, once a logistics office for a defunct company. 6 others joined her in building the system from scratch: a former TSA IT engineer, an immigration lawyer once illegally surveilled, an ex-investigative journalist stripped of their press pass, a law student who dropped out to track buried civil cases, and Eleanor Davison, the woman whose recording had changed the hearing's course. The organization had 3 goals. First, archive, encrypt, and publish all whistleblower data related to abuse at law enforcement checkpoints, especially airports, borders, and federal transit hubs. Second, provide legal support to individuals detained unlawfully, physically violated, or flagged without justification. And third, create a parallel reporting system so, whenever the official channels ignored complaints, Clearport Watch would make them public, verified, independently logged, and backed by legal evidence. Samantha rejected funding from government-aligned groups. She refused money from security contractors. Instead, she used her own savings from nearly 15 years of service, along with quiet backing from Eleanor, and one anonymous fund signed with just one line: for the one who dares not to stay silent. At their first internal briefing, no live stream, no press, no cameras, Samantha told the 5 others, "We're not building something to fight the system. We're building something so people don't get swallowed by it without anyone pulling them back." In the first week alone, Clearport received 37 reports, 11 cases of passengers held beyond legal limits at major airports, 6 of laptops confiscated without reason, 2 recordings of security officers discussing daily flag quotas, and 1 internal system log, evidence that passenger tagging algorithms were manually altered by region. Samantha didn't post anything online, didn't alert the press. Every case was reviewed, verified, coded, and categorized. She knew a new organization doesn't win by volume of outrage. It wins through endurance, the same way silence had won for years. When asked by a reporter, "Do you think you're going up against a system too big for any group to survive?" she answered, "I'm not fighting the system. I just refuse to live in one where silence is treated as a civic duty." The main room at Clearport Watch wasn't large. No national seal, no flags, no founder's name etched in gold. But directly behind the desk, on a brick wall still bearing old cement patches, was a glass frame mounted with dull black screws. Inside it, a silver metal badge, Samantha Johnson's former FBI ID, still displayed its serial number and faint scratches from years in the field. It was no longer a symbol of authority. It sat, framed like an artifact, a remnant of a journey that could neither be erased nor carried forever. Next to it was a photograph of her mother, a woman in a supermarket uniform holding 2 unpaid loaves of bread. The image wasn't from a memorial portrait, but from her mother's old employee ID badge, back when people still called her by her name, before she became the woman with suspicious behavior Due to a misunderstanding, no one wanted to clarify. Beneath the frame there were no medals, no flowers, no slogans, just one small sentence printed on the glass. Justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand firm. The line wasn't a motto, it was something her mother once said when Samantha asked why she didn't react after being falsely accused. Her mother had simply smiled, packed the groceries, and said, "Because if you shout, they'll call you aggressive, but if you stand without backing down, they'll eventually have to look again." Samantha didn't place her badge in a museum. She didn't auction it for charity. She didn't send it to a national archive. She chose to keep it in a small office beside the portrait of the woman who had taught her her first lesson in justice, not through oaths, but through quiet defiance. Not everyone who entered the office noticed the frame. Some passed by without a glance, but those who stopped often read that line twice. Some whispered it aloud. Some took a photo, not to post it, but to save it as a reminder for themselves. Under the warm evening light, the silver badge and faded photo seemed to glow. Not bright, not proud, but steady, just like her mother walking out of that supermarket, saying nothing, begging no one. Her presence, even in a blurred image, still stood tall on the wall, silent, but powerful enough to make people reconsider their tone when they spoke of justice. To Samantha, that frame wasn't closure, it was a marker, an anchor, a place where she reminded herself daily. If anger ever made her want to quit, she would look at the woman in the photo, a woman who had been falsely accused, lost her job, but never her dignity, and who inspired a 12-year-old girl not to stay silent, not out of revenge, but to stand firm. The name Samantha Johnson was no longer attached to any agency, rank, or government salary. It didn't appear on secure corridor ID cards. It wasn't listed on federal policy panels, but it lived where few names ever did, in the stories people told, in handwritten complaints sent to Clearport Watch, in the whispers of passengers wrongly detained and helped just in time. They responded quickly, I think. It's Johnson's group. No one called her former agent. No one needed to say celebrity. Her name endured not because it was elevated, but because it was never erased. No hollow accolades. But everyone remembered she was the woman dragged through an airport, and the one who returned with data, with reports, with an organization, not with vengeance. To many, she wasn't exactly an inspiration. She was a reminder that steadfastness needs no rhetoric, and that some truths won't emerge unless someone dares to hold them in place and call them by name. The framed room holding her badge and her mother's image wasn't locked. Anyone could walk in, sit quietly, no need for registration. Some came to tell their story, some just looked and left, and some, after reading the line beneath the glass, pulled out their phones, not to take a picture but to delete a status they had planned to post, rewriting it in a gentler voice because they realized their previous tone didn't deserve to be heard. Samantha never called herself a revolutionary, yet among the hundreds of emails sent weekly to Clearport Watch, many began with the same repeating line, I used to think I should stay silent, but then I remembered you didn't choose that. Not admiration, but solidarity. Not pity, but gratitude. Not a rally cry, but a period. A name never needing a statue can still stand tall if it's carved into a community's memory. Some stories are not just personal journeys, but mirrors reflecting an entire society. The story of Samantha Johnson, a black woman once falsely accused and dragged away in front of a crowd at an airport while no one asked a question, is proof that justice doesn't always speak right away. But if someone holds on long enough to the truth, it will find a way to reach the light. The first thing we must admit is this: prejudice does not reside in individuals alone. It lives in systems, in procedures, in the first glance people give each other. Don't judge someone too quickly just because they don't look like you, don't speak like you, or don't behave as you expect. Samantha wasn't the first to be treated unfairly, but she was one of the few who had the courage not to stay silent. The bigger lesson here isn't about an FBI badge, it's about a person's true worth, which lies not in titles, but in how they respond when mistreated. In a society that often runs on compromise, Samata chose to stand tall. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't assign blame. She built again, from scratch, a new system to protect those who never had the chance to speak. No one can measure someone's ability, dignity, or resilience by the color of their skin or the way they walk. Every person has inherent value, and it's a mistake to dismiss someone just because they can't or don't wish to prove that value immediately. Justice doesn't always have a clear shape, but it's always there, quietly present. Like the way Samata walked away from the institution that silenced her and started again with the very truth she was once forbidden to speak. Her story reminds us that many people are still being treated unjustly in silence, not because they're wrong, but because the system is too used to not being questioned. Silence is not harmless. It is a tool that swallows truth unless someone speaks. From someone once labeled suspicious, Samata became the founder of the first transparency initiative for border enforcement oversight. That didn't come from power, but from will and memory. Her mother's name, the woman who lost her job over 2 loaves of bread, is now part of the honor wall at the Clearport office. It's not glorification. It's a reminder. Justice is not born from the loudest voices, but from those who were once forced to be silent. We've all been misjudged at some point, maybe for where we come from, maybe for how we dress, maybe for being too quiet or too outspoken. But if you hold onto your truth, time and actions will speak for you. Steadfastness isn't always about shouting. Sometimes it's just having the courage not to step back when everyone advises you to let it go. It's choosing to keep going, even when those who once stood with you now choose to stand still. Have you ever been misjudged just because someone didn't understand you? Have you ever been underestimated, but quietly proved you were more capable than they thought? If so, let this story be your encouragement, not to fight with anger, but to know you are not alone. Share this story if it made you think. Tell it again, not because Samata is extraordinary, but because we've all been part of a system, and each time we retell a truth, we widen a crack of light. And if you want to stand with voices that no longer want to be silent, stay with us. Don't forget to subscribe to help spread more stories like this, where justice doesn't shout, but never backs down. Justice isn't distant or lofty, reserved for courts or governments. Justice begins in how we treat those with less power, how we listen instead of doubt, how we wait for truth instead of rushing to conclusions based on who looks different. We live in a time when information spreads faster than reflection. An accusation can make headlines before the truth even gets written. In that context, we need people like Samantha, not to resist everything, but to remind us. Truth doesn't defend itself. It needs someone to stand beside it. Samata doesn't need to be praised, but she deserves to be heard. Like so many others, never called by their names, never given apologies, simply because they had no badge, no title, no camera to record their truth. They are the reason this story must be told. Again, if you've read this far, maybe you carry part of your own story too. Maybe you've been misunderstood, misjudged, and treated like you were the problem. Believe this, you are not alone, and you don't have to stay silent. We would like to take this special moment to extend our deepest gratitude to all of you, our audience who have accompanied, followed, and supported our channel throughout this journey. Every view, every share, every comment you leave is not just a number or an interaction. It's a powerful source of motivation that fuels us to keep walking the path we've chosen. We understand that in a world overflowing with content, the fact that you pause to watch, to listen, to reflect, and to spread the stories we tell is a profound act of trust, one we deeply value. That's why we are committed to constantly striving for better, deeper, and more meaningful content for our community. In a world evolving by the hour, we need more than entertainment. We need stories that touch truth, spark thought, and awaken conscience. Our channel is not just a platform for storytelling. It's a space where we listen to what is rarely said, where we broaden our perspectives together, and where we amplify voices that deserve to be heard. We believe that every video and every article is more than just a media product. It is a bridge between you and us, between the audience and the storyteller, between the observer and those who've been overlooked. And in this journey, you are the ones who help carry the light, bringing what is right and important closer to the public. In the time ahead, we will continue to deliver content that reflects social realities with more honesty, humanity, and clarity. At the same time, we want to hear more from you, so that every program, every topic truly resonates with what you care about and feel is worth your time. Once again, thank you for believing in us and choosing to walk alongside us. This journey does not end here, and only with you can we keep doing what we believe is right, with sincere appreciation.